Carpenter, Commissioner Summers,
Here.
Commissioner Woods,
Here.
Sergeant Bill Clock,
Here.
Commissioner Hess, present, Commissioner Lazarus,
Here.
Commissioner Margolis,
Here.
Commissioner Webb. We have a quorum.
Great. So next, we're going to do the approval of the consent agenda, and I'm very quickly going to say hi to my girls at home, who I know are watching. Hi, kids. So are there any modifications to the agenda? Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Can I get a second? Thank you. So motion made by Parsons, seconded by Woods. All those in favor, please say yes. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, the agenda is approved. So now we're going to do the approval of the January minutes. Are there any modifications to the minutes from January?
Quick clarification. I believe that the minutes said that the annual report was unanimously approved. And I wanted to make sure if that was indeed the case, if we did record all of those votes, that everyone in the room voted yes.
Okay. I don't remember. Do you want us to sort of consult the tape, or?
I don't know. It came up at the council meeting last night about the annual report, and it would be good to know if the council member who serves on this body voted to approve that report. I believe she was here, and I believe she is in the minutes as attending, and it says unanimous. So I think to clarify for the record, that would be nice to have.
Okay.
Yeah, I can check with Kayla in terms of what the typical protocol is on that, but I'll let her know that.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Any other modifications to the minutes? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as presented with a possible clarification? I don't know how that works. I guess we just approve them as presented, and we'll look into it. So I need a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Okay. And the second?
Parsons.
Okay, motion made by Boland, seconded by Parsons. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed, please say nay. Okay, the minutes from the January Transportation Commission meeting are approved. So now a public comment period is now provided. Please observe a maximum 3-minute speaking time per person. Raymond, do you keep the time?
I do. I have the
Okay.
timer here.
And please state your name aloud before speaking, and you can sign in on the sheet by the podium.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Clark Chernetsky. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of attending the groundbreaking ceremony for the pedestrian bicycle stormwater tunnel that'll be built going beneath the tracks by the Ann Arbor Amtrak depot. And this is something that I'd like to see. And there are 2 other places, though, that I hope to see done at probably higher priority, but they didn't have a stormwater tunnel associated with it, which was what moved up this schedule. And that is by north end of Main Street around Vandermeer Park to get across the tracks there. And then the other place is between the Gallup Park area and the Arboretum. People traditionally have cut the fence, and I don't know how long railroad will put up with that, especially as they increase the speeds this year. So I hope that those would move along. Also, I read the report on update about the Nixon Road project to put in roundabouts and so forth. And there was some proposal to do it next year, and one thing you have to take into consideration is the construction traffic going on up by Duverne Road. I imagine it'll be going on for another couple of years, so that's something that would have to be factored in. You don't want to put in a new road and then have all these big trucks tear it up again. But I do hope that when that's done, that at least some repairs could be made in Dixon Road and also Traver by Logan School, because those are in really bad shape. They don't necessarily need complete resurfacing yet, but some repairs, aside from filling potholes that are needed. I saw a crew out there yesterday filling potholes. I also want to thank Howard Lazarus for his work on this committee, and he'll be missed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, thank you to all the members of the public for coming this evening. Your comments are valuable to the commission, and thank you, Clark. Okay, so moving on to information and discussion, we now invite Eli Cooper and Stacy Meekins to share a presentation on the Comprehensive Transportation Plan update.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission, and you too, Sergeant Clark. As Sergeant Clark usually reminds me to keep it brief, and so my role, as was at the last update on this, and thank you, Raymond, for bringing technology back online, is to, I'm out of time.
Time's up, Eli.
Sorry, Bill. We're now at 000s. But I'm going to turn it over to Stacy, who's going to share with you the continuing progress we're making with the transportation plan update. And pay attention, because my understanding is you're going to have a homework assignment. One of the things that the commission was keen on at our last update was being engaged in the process. So we are including you in some of the technical processes that we're using to capture information from our internal team, and we consider you as part of our internal team. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stacy, and I'll be available to answer questions afterwards. Stacy?
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me again. It's nice to be back in Ann Arbor. So a couple of things that I'm going to run through are just an update of what we've been doing since the last time we met in November, and go over what we've been talking about with the focus areas. We had a committee meeting just a few hours ago in which we focused on those. And then I'll open it up to Q&A, and I'll explain the homework assignment. You don't have to memorize it, because it will be coming via email as well. So some of this actually happened like right around the time we last met. The fact book was posted online, I think, that day. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. We also that day had an open house downstairs just before this meeting, and we piggybacked that with a corridor survey that mimicked one of the exercises we did in person. We followed that up with a pedestrian crossing survey in just around the first of the year in January, and we've been, as I mentioned, looking into the focus corridors and intersections. So just an overview of what we did here. We talked to 49 people at the open house, coming from 6 different zip codes. And then, as I mentioned, one thing we've learned is that there's pretty good participation in person, but there's extraordinary participation online. So we very deliberately followed up the open house immediately with an activity that mimicked one of the activities we did in person, so we could really capitalize on that involvement. So we got 586 responses to the online survey. In addition, I should describe that a little bit. I don't think I have a separate slide, but I think I did talk about it last time. You see in the upper picture here, somebody putting stickers on a board. We had one board for each of the focus corridors that gave a little bit of description at the top of the board about what's going on in that corridor, what we're seeing in terms of traffic, conditions for pedestrians, conditions for bicyclists, what is the transit service like. And then we asked people to rank based on mode of travel, rank their preferred mode of travel, or what the city should prioritize on that street. So we had a bicycle sticker, a pedestrian sticker, a transit sticker, and a vehicle sticker. And the other activity that we did in person was focused on a low-stress bike network. And so we had some informational boards about what does it mean to be a bicycle boulevard or a neighborhood greenway, which is a local street that's turned into a priority street for bicyclists. And we asked people what would be good additions to that low-stress network. The streets that are in green are what qualify today as a low-stress bike network based on an evaluation that's used pretty widely in the industry. So that's what's coming up as a low-stress route today, and then we asked what other streets would you like to see added to this network as a priority. So those 5 listed were the ones that were most commonly commented on: Packard, 7th, Miller, Stadium, and Washington. Then, as I mentioned, we did an online pedestrian crossing survey. We asked a number of questions about how useful or how beneficial certain amenities are that are added to crossings. So those include the rectangular rapid flash beacon, pedestrian crossing sign, just a sign at the side of the road, the kind of yellow sign saying crossing, or with a symbol for a crossing. Lighting, a pedestrian refuge island, an in-street pedestrian sign, or a pedestrian hybrid beacon. And we asked people to answer, as a pedestrian, which ones do you find most helpful, and then as a driver, which ones do you find most helpful. So the rectangular rapid flash beacon was found to be the most helpful from both perspectives. And as you can see, there's a little bit of variation depending on the perspective. For instance, the pedestrian refuge island was found to be more useful by pedestrians than by motorists. But another part of this that's pretty interesting is we asked people to choose which mode they most identify with. And so most people taking the survey identified themselves as a driver first. We did make people choose. We wanted to find out if they had to choose one, what would they say they are? And so most people were as a driver. And just some key findings from that. We found that 63% said they generally agree that people walking behave properly at mid-block crosswalks, but only 20% agreed that people driving behave properly at mid-block crossings. And remember, this was primarily people who are associating themselves as drivers saying that. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But there's also a majority who think that the city should continue to install mid-block crossings. So as we're getting into this phase of identifying strategies and vetting them, as I mentioned, I believe I went through this last time, that we are starting to focus on particular corridors and intersections. So in the existing conditions analysis, in that fact book, we have this map where we show what we're calling Tier 1 and Tier 2 focus corridors and Tier 1 and Tier 2 focus intersections. And the reason that these are based on a crash analysis, and the reason that we identified these is because one of the tenets of Vision Zero is to really focus your efforts, focus your investments where you're seeing the problems. So even though we're not going to focus on all of these in our work in the plan, gives the city a roadmap for the next 20 years. These are still the areas of focus beyond what we're looking at today and over the next several months. So just some statistics from those findings, 70% of the fatal and serious injury crashes occurred on just 30 corridors in the city. And 23% of the intersection fatal and serious injury crashes happened at 17 intersections. But in our scope, we had a scope of up to 10 priority locations to drill down into and look at specific strategies and develop some concept plans. So we had to prioritize that last batch even more. So we looked at safety, number one. We also looked at what are the traffic conditions, what is it like for all these other modes, what's transit activity, what are the pedestrian conditions, and we had a pedestrian demand index in the fact book, so looking at where is there likely to be pedestrian activity, what is the existing bicycle level of comfort. But we also wanted to be looking at a representative sample of different kinds of streets, because the idea of this exercise is to show some examples of what can be done, not just on this street, but elsewhere. So in addition to looking at specific locations, a Vision Zero tenet, again, is to focus your efforts where the problems are. And sometimes that's particular locations, but in some cases that's also specific behaviors. So what we found through the analysis is that these 5 behaviors or 5 causes were the most common causes of the serious injury crashes. So failure to yield, impaired driving, speeding, disregarding traffic signs and signals, and reckless and careless driving. So as we're crafting the strategies, we're very cognizant of making sure that we're targeting these behaviors with the strategies that we're laying out for the city. So the overarching kind of goals of these strategies that we're developing will be to reduce speeds, reduce number of cars on the street, increase compliance. So we're looking at enhancing transit service so that people are less reliant on their cars, and similar for improving infrastructure for people walking and biking. Not only does that protect the most vulnerable users, but it hopefully encourages more people to take trips by walking and biking and less driving. Reducing speeds, as I mentioned, and then just increasing compliance with traffic laws, including speed limits, but also turning behavior, complying with the traffic signs and signals that are out there. And of course, reckless driving and impaired driving as well. So I think I included just a handful of strategies that are under consideration. I'm not including the whole gamut, but this gives you a little bit of an idea. I wanted to give you enough to think about in advance of the homework assignment, and just in case you have questions for me tonight. So a queue jump lane, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this because I know it's come up on several corridors before, but what this does is provide a space where, I don't have a pointer, that green line shows it so that a bus can kind of get out of a queue of cars waiting at a stoplight so they can just kind of jump to the front of the line and go on their way. Transit signal priority is a similar idea, but a different tool. It allows a bus to maybe hold a green light when it might otherwise turn red so they can get through and just speed up the service, make it more reliable in general. Prepaid boarding was one that had come up, but it is likely not going to be considered actually. It's just not maybe old technology that is less useful, but the idea I think is still valid of looking for ways to speed up the boarding process and enhance the transit service that way. For those low-stress bike routes, some of the things we're looking at are sidewalk-level cycle tracks. One thing that I've mentioned to staff and to the committees is that Ann Arbor has been doing a great job with a lot of these, and so some of that low-hanging fruit that you hear about in our industry has already been picked here, so we're kind of trying to push to the next level with some of these. So through intersection markings, make a bike lane more visible in the most vulnerable part of a bicyclist's trip. Bicycle boulevards, sometimes called neighborhood greenways, as I mentioned before, they turn a low-volume local street into a priority through street for bicyclists. So there are a number of traffic calming tools that kind of are put together along one of these routes to make it a bicycle boulevard. A leading pedestrian interval would give pedestrians a head start in an intersection. It makes them more visible, and it just gives them priority in general. Bump outs, I know you're very familiar with these. Just, again, improving visibility of people trying to cross. It shortens the distance that they have to cross, so lessens their exposure in the street. It also tends to slow turning cars because it often ends up being a smaller curb radius than what might be out there now. Pedestrian refuge islands, I know you guys have a lot of these, so you're familiar with these. Speed reduction. Again, I know this has been talked about in Ann Arbor, and might not be the easiest thing to do on every street, but I think is a really important strategy for Vision Zero. Hardened centerline might be a new one to some people. This is a newer strategy where cities are using to try to slow vehicles that are turning, specifically making a left turn, and sharpen their turn so that not only do they slow down, but it actually puts them at a better angle for seeing a pedestrian crossing. And then interim treatments. So I may have even shown this last time, but what you see here is you see the planters and those white flexible delineators where there used to be a slip lane for right turning vehicles. And so what used to be a really small pedestrian pork chop island is now a really nice big space for people to continue along both streets and gives them better spaces to wait. And incidentally, spurred some jazz bands in the newly created plaza. But the point that the reason for bringing this up is not just the strategy of devoting space that used to be for a car over to pedestrian space, but that it was done really, really quickly. We actually worked on the plan that developed the concept for this, and the bollards and the paint were in place 6 months later. First time that's ever happened in my career. So this is kind of a more community-led version of something similar where sometimes it's called tactical urbanism. We're calling it a rapid intervention here, but where the community groups might still have to partner with the city, but they take it on themselves to create that public space. In this instance, I think they're just painting a crosswalk, so not necessarily a pedestrian space, but it could be. All right, so that's kind of a cross-section, no pun intended, of different strategies that we're looking at. The homework assignment will include the full list of strategies that we have developed so far, not just the ones that we developed, but it's culminating what we've gathered from the Technical Advisory Committee, from the Community Advisory Committee, and organized by value. So we have the 5 values that are guiding and organizing this plan. Excuse me. Within each value, there are a set of goals, and then these strategies are embedded within those goals. So what we'll be looking for is feedback on level of priority for the strategies, who should be the lead on this, who should be a partner, what kind of metrics should we be tying to these. And these are still very much a work in progress. So if we're missing some, please let us know. And I would also note that maybe some of these would fall off if they are not considered high priority, or we get feedback from you all or from the committees that it really isn't a priority at all. So look for that. And I'll open it up for questions.
In one of your earlier slides where you listed, I think it was 5 streets maybe, could you pull that list back up for a second?
Yes, the map. I don't know if I
I
actually
think
had
it
them.
Yeah.
The 10
Oh.
that you narrowed in on, is
Do you mean for the bike routes or the, this one?
Right there, yeah. So I was just curious, because most of those are basically on the west side, except for Packard, I guess, kind of goes. Is that usual that a city would have, like, almost half of its city would be more focused on bicycle lanes than the other half?
No, I think if we're building out a low-stress network, or any network, we'd want to make it citywide. So the streets you see here are simply reporting back what we heard in the meeting, but not necessarily what we're proposing be the end-all be-all for that low-stress
Okay.
network.
Do you think this is more reflective maybe of those who were able to get out to the meeting? than-
Absolutely,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
And we would like to follow this up with another online activity.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that slide's up there. This is a perfect maybe opportunity to jump in as well. I'm curious to hear how you're treating these 5 streets potentially as corridors, and there's ways to have a low-stress network avoid these streets. So how much are you guys looking at using neighborhood streets or alternative ways to get around? Washington is the only one that comes up as an obvious potential bicycle boulevard, which maybe is a secondary question. How many streets are you looking at to propose as bicycle boulevards at this point? And how many do you envision maybe at the end? Eli might be able to chime in too, I'm not sure.
We don't have a number that we're shooting for. I mean, we're going to be looking at building out a full connected network. And, but we are focused on a low-stress network. So that might be a combination of these larger arterial streets if we can get a protected facility on there. And if we can't, then we'd be looking for alternatives, like a bike boulevard.
Okay. So,
But it might be that we're also looking for bike boulevards at the same time.
Yeah.
It's not that we're prioritizing one type over another.
so it sounds like we're on the same page that low stress means like a family could ride a bicycle along
Yes.
this network.
Right.
Okay. And then a quick clarification, the target behaviors that you're going after, the 70%, 3 of those are clearly driver errors or misjudgments or disregarding. But failure to yield and disregarding traffic signs, does that also include pedestrians and cyclists that are involved in these fatal or serious injury? Or is this really drivers that are doing the,
So, I mean, it's pulled from the full data set, so it probably includes some of both. But I would say it's largely drivers, because these are the behaviors that are causing the serious injury and fatal crashes. And so that is primarily driver
driver behavior?
behavior, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Other question? Yeah.
Did you want to say
Oh, go
something
ahead.
first? Okay, so I have a few questions, and I'll put them out there. So this is to reduce the number of cars on the road, more of a macro approach. We learned recently that there are approximately 83,000 people who commute to Ann Arbor Monday through Friday. And I'm wondering if there has been any effort to take a look at how to reduce this number. I did see in the Ann Arbor Fact Book that 72% of these commuters are traveling 24 miles or less, and almost half, 46%, are traveling less than 10 miles. So I'm wondering if we can maybe just take a look at maybe those who aren't traveling as far. And I guess the question for you is, what can we do about this? Can we look at maybe commuter buses that run certain times of the day, increasing bike paths with city partnerships, awareness of park and ride, that sort of stuff? So that's one of my questions. I don't know if you want to address that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to set Ann Arbor up for a more multimodal system overall, so that people who are traveling short distances can choose other modes, and they don't feel like driving is their only choice. So there's that side of it. There's a number of strategies, I think, that are going to have to work together to drive down the number. Keep saying these puns, and I don't mean to move the needle on number of people driving. And so park and ride is one of the strategies that we are looking at. Kind of lost my train of thought, but building out a more multimodal network in general. And we are also, while it's not the main focus of the plan, we do have strategies written in there that talk about improving or co-locating destinations better, so creating more insular neighborhoods where people don't have to travel as far to get to school or to doctor's appointments or whatever, and it's not just about the travel side of it, it's also about how do we create closer destinations.
Okay. Another thing I wanted to bring up is that safe routes to school is a very important issue. It's important to me, and I know a bunch of other Ann Arbor residents. And I think at the November open house, there was a suggestion to provide more than one low-stress route for middle schoolers and high schoolers to get to school, whether they're pedestrians or bicyclists. I think that's really important. And also, I know that we have 25-mile-per-hour zones in effect in school zones, but I think also there needs to be greater enforcement. So even though we do have the reduced speed limit, I'm not seeing a whole lot of compliance, at least from what I see, especially on Huron Parkway near Huron High School. I just wanted to put that out there as something that's important. Also, when we talk about enhancing transit service, this may not be like the right time to talk about it, but I think we also need to talk about increasing service within our service area. We've talked about it before as a commission, increasing nighttime and weekend service, but I'm not sure, again, if this is, I just wanted to mention that. And I have a design comment on the Q lane, if we could bring that up. Yeah, so I thought this was really interesting. I'd be a little concerned about bus-bicyclist interactions with something like this, and I'm no design expert at all, but I just thought, if it were reversed, where the bus was, say, on the left and the bicyclist was on the right, closer to the curb, and as the bus approached a stop, there would be like a wraparound behind the stop for the bicyclist to pass through, and maybe there's like this bump out or island for the pedestrians so that there's not like conflict between pedestrians and bicyclists, but that's just how I would see it, because I just would be a little cautious about the
Yeah.
bus-bicycle interaction.
This isn't specific to Ann Arbor, this is just a graphic lifted
Okay.
from the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Bit of a mouthful, and this is a particular case. Your point is well taken, and I fully agree with that, and I think I was just thinking about it earlier tonight too. We show bus bulbs in the presentation for the committee tomorrow, and in some cases, you would have to have that island that you're talking about and let the
Right.
bike lane wrap around it so you don't have that conflict. In this case, it's a street with on-street parking, and I think it was unavoidable, but
Okay. All right, and then just one last thing, I know I'm talking a lot. I know that we've seen a lot of great data on, just traffic accidents in general. Have we looked at it by day of the week, time of day, season? I mean, I don't know, maybe I haven't seen it.
I think we saw that before you came onto the commission.
Oh, before I was here, okay. So I just think that's another piece to inform action, so maybe I'll dig that one up.
okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Stacy, thanks for the presentation. I just had a clarifying question. Your last two slides, which talked about, interim treatments as well as the tactical urbanism. I just want to make sure I understand correctly. These are valid approaches to achieve Vision Zero. These are tools in the toolbox. These are things that are worth contemplation as an expert in Vision Zero.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think that there are several good reasons for using this approach. The first is that you can get it in very quickly, and from a safety perspective, there's no sense in waiting to make streets safer. So that's one reason why I really like them. Another reason, which other people probably appreciate even more, is specifically traffic engineers and transportation engineers appreciate this part even more, is that it's a way to test the treatment before making it permanent and putting a lot of time and money into a change that's going to be around for a long time. And in this specific example, on the other side of the street, they actually did change the design after putting it in, because while it seemed to work on paper, it seemed to work based on auto turn simulations. When they put it out there, they found that some of the trucks and buses were actually clipping the corner and having trouble making some of the turns, and so they tweaked it. And it was a way that they could tweak it and still keep the main benefits of what they were going for, and again, without having sunk a lot of time and money and actual concrete into it. And so now it's being made permanent.
Hi. So, as maybe you were, I was very dismayed by the 3% of people who thought taking the bus was their way to get around. And on this commission, we've talked about how there are sometimes very serious problems with the buses staying on time, 30 minutes late, 40 minutes late. And those sort of tweaks that you presented to us, I wonder, are they a solution to that problem, or are they a solution to a much more minor problem than what we're seeing here?
I don't know if I can answer that without having more time to analyze specific situations. But I do think that many of these are not a solution in and of themselves. It takes a suite of these strategies together to really make a difference. So I think if you get fewer people driving in general, and you get more people on the bus, and you can get the bus to bypass signals or bypass cues, taken all together, hopefully that makes a difference, and you can speed up the boarding process. All of those add to each other.
Just a quick couple things to say, just real quick. A timestamp, the interim treatments and guerrilla tactics, just so I can review it later, occurred about 40 minutes in. So as for watching later, is there any documents that you might be able to provide for us, or studies? Because this seems to be a somewhat contentious issue, not necessarily with the people currently at the table, but with others who we might be able to help foster a better understanding of.
I will look into that.
Great, thank you very much.
And I just have one quick question. You mentioned that there is a standard for what qualifies as a low-stress bicycle network or bicycle road, and I
Yeah.
was wondering if you could just tell us briefly what that is.
Sure, it's what's called a level of traffic stress analysis, and it factors in volumes, vehicular volumes, the geometry of the street. Is there a bike facility on it? Are there parked cars? Like, what's the separation between traffic and bicyclists? And if you don't, and speed limit or speeds. So ideally, you have actual volumes and you have actual speeds. If you don't, you can use number of traffic lanes and speed limit as proxies. And then it gives it a score of 1 through 4 based on that combination of factors.
Great, thank you.
Sure. One more note on, this isn't specifically an interim treatment or a tactical urbanism treatment, but just one more note on that topic. It not just allows you to test it, but you can take before and after data, and we are doing that in Chicago with hardened center line and some of the paint and post bump outs, specifically for a Vision Zero action plan downtown. So later, so I can share that with you too, the analysis of that specific project.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Just one quick question, and that was when you mentioned about the concern about buses clipping corners or, hitting the curbs and stuff like that. How does, do you happen to know, like, for example, sometimes when I ride the University of Michigan bus, and it's coming, I guess I'd say south on maybe Church, I think it might be Church Street, and it's going to make a right-hand turn right there at East Quad. And everybody on the bus holds their breath because it looks like the driver is going to hit you know, the poles that are there. Are poles ever moved back in order to give buses more room to maneuver so that, one, it's not so hair-raising for the passengers, but also it just makes for a better ride? And I'm not sure if others know the spot I'm talking about, but it's one of those things where sometimes when you're on a bus and you see how, you know, you're like, is this person going to really make this turn or not? You know? And let alone if you happen to be in a car and the bus is coming towards you and you're sort of worried about that.
No, I mean, there are definitely standards of how close a pole can be to the curb, but I don't think there's a difference in that standard for a bus route.
No, okay.
We do have some experience at South Maple and Scioto Church where there was a tight corner, and instead of moving the physical infrastructure, what we did was move the stop bar. So the cars were kept further away so the bus could swing around. Moving physical elements is, as I say, cost prohibitive, it's expensive. There are ways to use the actual physical space by restricting where the stop bar is, allowing for larger vehicles to make turns easily.
And one other thing I can add to that too, you know, this signs and signals staff, especially if it's city signs or signals, we monitor how many signs get knocked down, when and where, and what needs to be replaced. I can tell you one of the locations that gets hit probably more frequently than not is the corner of Main and Huron, especially because semis that take that turn to go, if they are westbound and they're turning to go north on Main, they'll clip that corner, and there's a pedestrian signal there on that corner that oftentimes gets clipped. And so we actually did move it back because it had been clipped so many times. It gets hit a lot less, but probably a month ago or so it got hit again. So it's just one of those things that, now the placement of those has to be in a certain location because of ADA accessibility and making sure it's in, you know, a certain proximity to the pedestrian ramps. So, you know, there's only so much wiggle room we have sometimes, but it is something we can monitor.
Thank you.
One more real quick, sorry, sorry. Thank you so much for everything.
Do you need another blondie?
You used a phrase that I hadn't heard before, so I assume it's sort of standard in your industry of paint and post.
Yes, sir.
And I just, you said it with such familiarity, like this is an industry standard way of talking about these sort of treatments that are now standard and even leading sort of edge. So I just wanted to highlight that, and maybe as you share information, maybe you could clarify that this paint and post strategy is sort of the leading edge of where Vision Zero experts are moving the field forward.
Sure.
That would be helpful, I think, for us.
Sure.
As
Yeah,
we
and
move
this is
forward.
what I was referring to. Paint.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. I mean, paint and post. I love paint and post. Let's move it forward. But there's, you know, as with all treatments, there's some who don't like them for whatever reason. But I just,
Sure.
to clarify those, I think would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you all.
I think we need
Yes,
to
sir.
move on. No, it's okay. Thank you
Thanks.
very much. This was great.
I look forward to your input from your homework assignment.
I'm excited to
You guys
do the
have great input, so it's very helpful. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so we now invite Missy Stoltz to share a presentation on the A20 carbon budget analysis.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for making time to get a little update on how things are going. And it was actually pretty brilliant. Stacey's going to run away. I see that. She gets out of here. It's unfair. That she started kind of with their work because this is going to build off of it. And I'm going to go big. So you're going to get a sneak preview of some information. So I just want to do a refresher for those who haven't seen it. A20 is our commitment to figuring out how we're going to achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2030. And the three things that we're thinking about as part of this are, of course, how are we reducing carbon pollution, climate pollution broadly? How are we adapting to the impacts of climate change that are already here? And how are we making sure that all of this work is grounded in equity, acknowledging that those that are the most impacted by climate change are those that likely did the least to contribute to the problem? And so that's kind of the framing as we think about A20. And the vision that we're aspiring for is that together, and we mean that literally, together, that we are able to create and implement a just transition to carbon neutrality by 2030. So a refresher, community-wide does mean every resident, business, University of Michigan, government institutions, the people moving and how we move in our community, you know, so super easy task. Numerically, this is just kind of the refresher, and I know you've seen some of these slides, but in case you have a lot in your lives, I'm sure you don't think about this every minute you're awake like we do. But what basically this is our greenhouse gas inventory. We started doing the inventory in 2000, and since that time, we've achieved a 12% reduction community-wide in greenhouse gas emissions, and that's worth celebrating. We basically have to just ramp that up at scale because we've got to go from where we are today, which is 2.1 million metric tons, down to 0. Here we go. So a little update on the process. We are still in process, and I'll show you that at the end so you can get a sense of where we are. I think it is worth, you're the first audience that's getting this slide. We have 82 working days to have done this, from when it started to when we have to present. 82 working days, so sit with that. In that time, we will have hosted 3 public surveys. Those surveys have averaged over 1,000 respondents. Our 3rd survey will go live on Friday, and so that'll be kind of a takeaway for everyone. My homework to you is help us to get more people to take that survey. We will have hosted over 60 public events. As of next Friday, we will have hosted 57 public events already as part of this process, and those events look different, and I'll tell you about that momentarily. We'll have hosted 2 large town halls. Your second homework is, if you haven't yet, please register for the second town hall, which will be this Saturday at Pioneer High School, and that's open to everyone. That is everybody is welcome to come and be part of this discussion. The public events that we've had so far are very targeted, and they're targeted towards constituents that don't traditionally participate in these processes. So for example, this morning, one of our team members who is exceptional was at affordable housing sites. And so we're talking to our affordable housing patrons to understand their needs and how that differs from perhaps a senior living center, and how that's different than members at the neutral zone, our kind of youth ambassadors and leaders. So we're being much more targeted and strategic in our outreach. We have over 60 partners. We're at 62 partners that we're working with. We have 80 technical advisors who are helping us think about what's possible, and so we're combining all of that. And inside that funnel is the process. That first phase was this ideation. What's possible? What do people like? Let's just throw anything out. The second phase, which we are concluding, is concluded, is prioritization. So you've got those ideas, we've got to whittle them down. We will finish the top part of that 3rd bubble, which is the quantification, tomorrow at 5 p.m. because we have to. And then we'll move into the last phase of public engagement, which is the how. And this looks a little bit different than what I shared with you before, because we thought that the 3rd phase would actually be a public vote on what goes in. And the answer is it all goes in, because we've quantified it. And that's where we are. So this is the sneak preview of what we're going to talk about in detail at the town hall. There are 5 overarching strategies that aren't negotiable for hitting carbon neutrality. The first, we have to power our electrical grid with 100% clean and renewable energy. It's just not possible without that. This is the biggest thing that we can do, because over 50% of our emissions are from electricity. Second, we have to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 50%. Just want to sit with that one for a second. It might be 45. We're working on the margins, but it's looking close to this number. And you just heard.
Sorry, personal individual car vehicles.
Correct. That's correct. And the next slide is going to give you a preview of what we're proposing, partially is the how. My job is to tell you what is needed to get to carbon neutrality, right? And that's what we're going to sit with and we're going to struggle with over the next 9 3/4 years. That's how we're going to achieve this. The third, we have to switch our appliances, our vehicles, from gasoline, diesel, propane to electric, because now we've powered that electric system with clean and renewable energy. We have to improve the energy efficiency in our homes, businesses, schools, places of worship, government facilities, et cetera. What is different in this narrative is, if any of you are, long time kind of environmentalists, we talked about energy efficiency first. It's just not true anymore. It has to all happen. We don't have time to phase things in that way. So we're thinking about how we package this as something we can work with our residents and our businesses on. And then lastly, we have to change the way that we use and interact with resources. And this is primarily mathematically about food waste, very candidly, because methane is the thing that we generate with food waste. And then secondarily about the refrigerants that are in our systems, because refrigerants are very, very potent greenhouse gas emissions. So here's your sneak preview. Here's what we're calculating right now. This is what came out of public comment. It came from the technical advisors. There is a lot of support for these strategies, -1, and I'll buy you a Zingerman's candy bar if you guess which one. There's not a lot of support for in here. Basically, just as you know this, you just talked about this. Everything Stacey talked about, your questions all are they're these things, right? We have to increase public transit service. We have to have better transit service. We have to significantly scale EV charging infrastructure throughout the community. It has to be effectively ubiquitous so people don't have range anxiety. We have to electrify all of our buses, our fleets, and our private vehicles. We have to implement the non-motorized plan, and more specifically, we need to have protected bike lanes, we need shade, we need sidewalks, again, that are ubiquitous so people can get to where they need to go. They need to be safe. We need to reset parking fare structure. Ding, 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 there's the winner, if you didn't know which one, didn't have a lot of support. We have to think about land use, and not think about it in a fun way, but we need to really challenge land use. And this includes by right, that in any area you can build duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. We need to densify our community. We have to have increased park and rides we need more park and rides, period. And then we need transit service that is very, very frequent. Think 5 to 10 minutes at most to those park and rides to get people where they need to go. We need regional rail because we have people coming in, and we need to make sure that in our neighborhoods we have more accoutrements like bakeries and breweries and coffee shops, because people need to walk to those accoutrements as opposed to getting into the store to drive for that one thing that they need they could have walked towards. This is what it comes down to. I'm sure none of you are surprised, but we're figuring out how. And that is in fact what the final survey that we're working on right now is going to get at. So the survey that we're drafting, that I was finishing up in the back, is asking each individual that takes it to tell us, how are you going to reduce vehicle miles by 50% in your life? What can we be doing to support you in that? Because again, the math sort of shows we're not playing around on the margins anymore. Like, this is what this is going to take. So to give you a sense, just to kind of close out with the process where we are, we're at the far right side. We are going into a town hall on Saturday. We're really excited about that. It'll be a chance to kind of show where we are. We encourage, if anyone's listening, encourage people from all walks of life to join us. We have youth that are helping. They're going to be tabling. They're going to be talking about their experience. The only formal plenary speaker we have, or speakers we have, is a youth plenary. We're really excited about what they're going to offer to that discussion. We will launch the survey at that time too. That'll be the last kind of big formal input, which again really focuses on how. So we know the strategies, we're going to start drafting around the margin of them. The cost calculations will start coming in tomorrow. So we'll be able to go into the town hall with numbers. They'll be directionally appropriate numbers. They won't be, and 43 cents, of course, because we have to refine those kinds of things. And then we haven't even started to calculate how many events we have in March, but I was told today that we're going to be even more exhausted than we have been, because March is shaping up to be very, very busy with our partners, especially because the partners at that point are going to want to really engage in the how in much more depth. So we're running March 30th. We present to City Council the draft strategy as well as the budget implications for it. So 2 immediate opportunities. You've already heard me talk about these. One is the flyer for the town hall. We have these electronically. We are asking people to RSVP. There will be food trucks. It will be fabulous. We have some design folks that are going to sketch things for you so you can visualize what all this means. It'll be great. Hope to see you all there. And then please do help get word out when the survey goes live. We'll do a press release. I'll make sure Kayla distributes it to you as well. This will be our opportunity to really help us understand how, and we need this data. I will tell you, it's not surprising that not everyone taking the survey loves the things that we're doing, and of course they shouldn't, right? This is a democratic process, but we really need to be honest with ourselves about what this is going to take, and so I think we're pretty fearless in presenting this, and we'll see where that goes. So this is just the reminder. There are lots of ways you can get involved, and I do want to just take a second and acknowledge a number of folks who've made this possible, who happen to be in this room right now. One is Raymond Hess, who has been, yes, absolutely. He has helped greatly with lots of things, but especially with the mobility sector and thinking about what it's going to take to really break through. And you will get to hear him speak on Saturday, should you attend the event. Very excited. And I have to thank City Administrator Lazarus for giving us permission to be fearless in this work and to really challenging what we say in our office is we challenge what's possible. And that's what we're doing with this plan and this strategy. And I think he has made that possible. And so we just want to respect and appreciate that. Questions, concerns, heartburn? Anything to share?
I thoroughly appreciate the candor and upfrontness with how you're presenting this, and I appreciate it. I think we can model it for other items that come up. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for your work.
Let's do it.
So I was interested in getting the grid completely electrical. So does that mean DT is a partner and
question.
they're on board?
We work with DT in many ways, and there are definitely partnerships that are emerging. You might have heard about a landfill solar project we're working on with them that is in full partnership. The strategy, though, that we're modeling here is something called community choice aggregation. And it is a policy that is enabled in Ohio, in Utah, and basically what it is it would give someone, in this case, let's just pretend that is me on behalf of the city, permission to go to the market and say on behalf of all Ann Arbor residents and all businesses, our X gigatons of usage, we want that to be 100% clean and renewable energy. We want that to be additional. We're not going to buy wind in Texas and push someone off wind in Texas. We want this to be in communities, environmental justice communities where it's co-designed with them. Whatever our parameters are, we can go to market and I can buy that. And when I buy at that bulk, we get costs that are really good. And so that's actually the strategy that we're working for. And we have to get enabling legislation at the state to do that. You'll see we model, the way we kind of model this one out is that it takes the first few years with no impact because we're working on legislation. We get legislation through after a number of very probably painful years, and then we go to market and buy.
Great,
So
thank
that's
you.
a strategy, yeah. Awesome. Well, if you do have thoughts, please let us know. And really, honestly, please do tell your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues to come out if they can on Saturday. We really want to bring a lot of people into this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we're moving on to business, and the next item on the agenda is the 7th Street Process Committee.
Yeah,
I'm
if I
not sure
remember
who's
correctly, I
talking
think
about
this is the one that Kayla had suggested that we postpone to the next meeting, in part because Commissioner Linda Diane Felt is out today. I think she's been kind of instrumental in moving this issue forward, so unless...
Oh, right. Well, so there was I think today we're actually just supposed to be appointing someone to the committee.
Okay.
And that we can do.
Yes.
Now. The nomination was Seth somebody, Peterson?
Peterson, mhm.
Thank you, everyone. So, let's see, the order of operations here is, I think we have motions and then we talk about it and then we vote?
Sounds good.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Linda Diane agreed to be my parliamentarian and then she's not here. So, great. So, do I have a motion to appoint Seth Peterson to the 7th Street Mobility Committee?
So moved.
Parsons, and a second.
A second.
Great.
Ready.
So, questions, comments, thoughts? Yes.
I was involved with discussions about 7th Street with staff and with Seth, was in the room during that entire discussion. I think he's the perfect person to serve, and he's willing to. So I, without reservation, recommend that we approve him to this subcommittee
Great.
or committee.
Committee. Yep. Other comments, questions? Okay, so all those in favor of appointing Seth Peterson to the 7th Street Committee, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, so Seth is appointed, and I guess Raymond, you'll talk to Kayla about talking to Seth and letting him know that that's
Will
happening?
do.
Okay, great. Moving right along, we have the Micromobility Committee update, that's me. So the Micromobility Committee has gotten the band back together again. We've had 2 meetings so far. Most of what we have done thus far is talk about the SPIN, agreement with SPIN, and our thoughts and feelings about what we should do next in terms of agreements with partners for the scooter share system. The SPIN contract is coming up in April, I want to say. And so we've given some feedback to that. If any of you have any thoughts about how you would like to see us partnering with third-party companies around scooters, let us know. Yeah, Tim?
Well, the one point I wanted to make, I think it somehow got lost, that is that I'm pretty sure the requirement for spin requires you to have a driver's license, but I'm pretty sure that that is not in fact a state law requirement for the scooters. And I feel like that limits accessibility to some people, and I feel like that should be explored in any re-upping of the contract. I mean, maybe they all would insist on this for insurance reasons, but I don't know. I mean, if it's not, if there's a way to get rid of that requirement, I feel like it should be. And the other thing could be mentioned as far as like accessible options for people with disabilities that may not be able to use the normal scooters or.
Yep. Thank you for that. We will bring that back to the committee, especially the driver's license thing. So, yeah,
Can I make a comment? There is a precedent for micromobility in the e-bike law in Michigan. So you want to require, scooters are not as fast and not as big as an e-bike. And you only need to be 14 to operate one alone. So there is a precedent for that you can take to the company to try to get rid of the requirements for the driving license.
great. So what we've started talking about now is the revisions to the city code to update our language around things like bike lanes to be more inclusive of other kinds of micromobility options. Our next meeting is on Friday, March 6th at 9 a.m. here in City Hall. So if any of you want to join us or members of the public would like to join us, you're always free to do that. But that's all I've got for now for the Micromobility Committee. Did I miss anything?
The only thing I would like to mention is one of our interns did the analysis of usage at the
Yeah.
first meeting.
Yes,
We
that's
spent a
right.
lot of time talking about kind of the patterns that we're seeing in terms of where, how the scooters are being used.
Yeah, that was really helpful, actually, and I'm assuming that that's somewhere on I think that was in the packet for tonight,
Yeah.
that
yeah.
data?
We are posting all the materials from the Micromobility Steering Committee. Anything that we present to them, we're posting it online as well, so then folks can reference that material if they'd like.
Great, yeah, and that data was really helpful, and we requested some additional visualizations that I think
Probably
she's
by
still
the next
working on.
meeting we'll have it,
Yeah,
yeah.
so, that was great.
What are you recommending in terms of the bike lanes? Are scooters going to be in the bike lanes, or right now they're on sidewalks, right?
So right now, it's both, because that's the rule for bicycles. Essentially, what it looks like we're doing is replacing the word bicycle with something like personal mobility vehicle, so that the rules as they apply to bikes are also going to apply to scooters, e-skateboards, which already have a state law governing them. So it's not going to be a really dramatic change, I don't think. It's more just so that the scooters are not living in this gray area anymore.
So, this may be probably better left again, to the meeting in March. And like, if I show up there, how much input, am I allowed to have? Otherwise, I did read through this, and the definition of a micromobility vehicle, I really think we need to be careful with that and stay away from defining the vehicle and actually concentrate more on the infrastructure. So I saw something like a 175-pound vehicle. The state doesn't have any weight requirements or anything like that for e-bikes. It's all based on power and speed. So I really believe that we should take a look at that 3-class e-bike law and try to use that as a window on how to deal with all the other because they're basically the same thing.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. The defining of the vehicles is something we've been wrestling with, and none of those definitions are set yet. If you would like to join the committee, we can add more, I'm assuming we can add more commission members to the committee. So when this committee was formed, you weren't on the commission yet. If you'd be interested
Yeah,
in
I
joining,
would
we
be,
can
yeah.
probably get it on the agenda for next month to appoint you to the committee, and in the meantime, you can come to meetings.
Okay.
Can I say all those things? Okay. Great, so then we can get you looped in on all of
Okay,
that.
yeah, great.
Okay, so I think that covers the micromobility committee. We were going to have a general discussion around committee work, but the two people who were going to lead that were Kayla and Linda Diane, so
That's
perhaps we
correct,
could
yeah.
postpone this one. Postpone is the right word, right?
Yeah.
Or table, yeah.
Postpone.
We're going to postpone that one, and jump right into the street, bridge, and sidewalk millage. I'm excited for this one, and this is you, Raymond. Good. Can we keep going?
Let's pause for just a quick second.
Does anyone need
Yeah, I'll take
another
one of those
Blondie? Members of the audience.
It's working?
We're good?
Okay.
Okay,
Got mine.
great. So, street, bridge, and sidewalk millage.
Yes, Madam Chair, I don't have really a lot to report on this. Included in the packet is a memo that kind of describes the street, bridge, and sidewalk millage kind of strategy moving forward. So you'll find that it is up for renewal next year. This is something that is placed on the ballot. However, next year, there's not anticipated to be an election, just based on kind of the new cycle of elections. And therefore, it would probably be cost prohibitive well, not cost prohibitive, but it would be costly to hold a special election just for this. So there is a strategy currently being formulated at the city to move that up to this year. Obviously, it would replace the existing one if it gets voted forward. So there wouldn't be two simultaneous millages for a year overlap. And then the other thing is really contemplating, first of all, the duration. I think in the past they were 5 years. There's discussion about whether it should move to a 4 or 6 year cycle to align with the election, so that way there doesn't have to be a special election. There's also some discussion in the memo about whether the millage might be increased to address some of the things that we've been hearing about, sidewalk gaps and things like that. So I believe finance is still looking into how close we are to the cap in terms of whether it can even be raised to begin with. And then, just the other thing, in the past, what you see also in your pack is an accompanying resolution. Typically, what's been done in the past is council has passed a resolution that pretty much outlines what the money will be used for. Not necessarily a slate of projects, but just kind of parameters around what that money can be used for. My understanding is historically this funding has been used for resurfacing the streets, to kind of get our streets up into good condition, and it has, we're not still on target, but we're a lot closer than we've been in the past. Then it was broadened a little while ago to include bridges as well as sidewalks, because they were all kind of viewed as extensions of kind of the street and how the streets are being used. And so this funds various programs. Obviously, there's resurfacing, there's kind of the operations and maintenance of bridges. It helps with our mid-block crossings and all of our crosswalk improvements that we do as well, those pedestrian improvements. So we wanted to provide this to you. I think it's really an informational item. We're not necessarily looking for action from the commission tonight. Just comments from you. If you have thoughts, you can either share with them, you can share them with me tonight, or you can send them to myself, Kayla, and/or Nick Hutchinson, the city engineer, where we can kind of take those, under advisement before we develop the final strategy for city council's review and approval.
Are there any comments or questions about that? Yes, Tim?
Yeah, well, I kind of I hear the idea of having this, so that it could help fund new sidewalks rather than just existing sidewalks, because we're seeing the resistance to sidewalks being constructed being based on the special assessment, and like the people responsible not liking that, and the people who would be responsible for that. And I'm wondering, how would this work? Would it be just select sidewalks get funding and others still do the assessment, or would it be taking them all over? Because I feel like it might be hard if it's just select sidewalks, because then some people would feel like, oh, well, they're getting to skip out on the assessment, but they have to pay, and it would have to make sense the way it would work. And I'm wondering how they would think about that, because I do think that's a good idea. And the other thing I'm kind of curious about, I'm guessing this is all at some point going to be too much money, but is snow removal, because that is talked about a lot as far as sidewalks, and how we have this patchwork system of all the residents are responsible. Well, they're very inconsistent, because it's just something that you have to rely on enforcement, and it's not like the city comes through like they do for the roads.
Yeah.
So I can probably address the first question probably a little bit better than the second. The first one, I think it's really a function of the funding, right, in terms of how many sidewalk gaps can be filled. What I will tell you is, as a matter of fact, we presented something, I think Nick Hutchinson came and talked about kind of the sidewalk gap prioritization process. So, what that does is it factors in 9 or 10 different criteria that kind of, help us identify what the priority segments of sidewalk are that need to be filled, those gaps. So I would imagine that would help drive where those investments are, because obviously, this millage only generates so much money per year. We can't do everything we want to do, so this would help prioritize the work. The other thing to note on that is, I just lost my train of thought on that one. Yeah, but, I think, that's what it was too. The other thing that we have our GIS folks looking at is looking at sidewalk gaps through several different lenses. So a good example is, what is a true sidewalk gap? Meaning there's sidewalk, a block here and a block here, and there's a missing link between them, versus entire neighborhoods where there might not be sidewalks. And not to say one is better or worse than the other, the need isn't greater, but looking at it, kind of categorizing those gaps differently, just so we can, look at them, where is the greater need? Is it filling in that gap, or is it filling in the entire neighborhood that, doesn't have any sidewalks? So just kind of clustering them in kind of those different buckets so that we can kind of see where, those true needs are. And then again, seeking direction from policymakers and others in terms of where those investments are best suited. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. For snow removal, Commissioner Hall, you're absolutely right. This has been an ongoing conversation. I unfortunately don't know the specifics about whether snow removal can be used with this funding source. I suspect that's more of an operational. That sounds like, and maybe Howard can correct me if I'm wrong, that feels like an Act 51 fund. That's operational and maintenance of the infrastructure versus the millage, which I think is more of a capital investment. But I'm kind of making that up. So I can find out and get back to you if that's actually true or not. But I think, since I haven't heard snow removal in this space before, I suspect that that's the reason why.
Snow removal is an operating cost which is covered by the Act 51 or gas tax revenues. We looked at it a couple of years ago, and for an average winter, I think the cost was around $4 million. There's a timeliness aspect to it as well. It can take a while to go out and not rely on property owners or residents to shovel out their sidewalks. So if there's a desire to do it, then council can dictate that that's what they'd like to do, realizing that there are trade-offs involved, as well as how quickly we can get that done.
Great. I will just add that I also would love to see more evaluation of the possibility of including all sidewalk assessments in the millage. I understand that there's this equity issue where houses, the purchase price was probably lower with the understanding that there were no sidewalks, and that it may end up being an unfair advantage to those homeowners who then get the sidewalks put in for free. But it seems as though these assessments are one of the primary barriers we've had over the last couple of years to dealing with sidewalk gaps. And if that's something that we can take away. I think that that would, the value to safety would potentially outweigh the fairness aspect.
Yeah, Mr. Hutchinson recently provided me with a pretty good representation of what sidewalk gaps are, what the cost would be to fill them, and then if we don't take the city as a whole, the areas where they're wanted and they would be put in, which is a smaller subset, then I can ask him to recast that as a memorandum and send it back through Raymond.
That would be helpful. Thank you. Other comments about this? Okay. Great. So we're moving on to staff report and updates, which is also you, Raymond. You're the star of the show tonight.
Yes, Madam Chair. So included in your packet is the monthly report that we provide. Again, we're still experimenting with this new format where we're just giving you the updates from month to month as opposed to giving you the full litany of projects. We're trying to be careful in how we monitor that so that something doesn't fall through the cracks that we were monitoring, that we did do something on, that we didn't report on. So Allen Creek berm opening, I think it was mentioned earlier during public comment, that was held yesterday morning, right? So that's a very exciting project for us. The Barton Drive from M14 to Pontiac, we've had some public engagement. There's resolution number 2 went before City Council last night and was approved. Just as a reminder for these sorts of projects, there are 4 resolutions that are required, so this is just 2 of 4. But the project is, moving forward still. Fuller Court, Nixon, Traver Sidewalk Gap Project. Construction is planned for 2020. Special assessment meeting was held on February 5th, and Resolution 2 is expected to go to City Council in March on that special assessment. Hollywood Drive, I think the big thing to note here is the project was postponed until spring of 2021. I think initially it was identified for this next construction cycle. That's been pushed back a year. Jackson Avenue and Washtenaw Avenue Sidewalk Gap Project. Construction is expected to start summer of 2020 and actually start as early as March of 2020. So that's exciting. Under other sidewalk gap projects, again, you'll see that the Hollywood Drive project is removed because it's associated with the paving project up above. Rectangular rapid flashing beacon installations, there were several that were installed on Industrial in January, so those are noteworthy. We do expect to install some on Huron Parkway later this year as well with a safety grant that we got, and we do anticipate other locations to be identified as well. We're currently going through and prioritizing that work. Scioto Church from Maple to 7th, there was a public meeting held late last month. And we're currently synthesizing the feedback on that. Nixon Road Corridor Improvement Designs. There should be a report available in your packet related to that project. Again, we're still working with Ray Trim and Associates to kind of work through what that design will look like. This has several different roundabouts proposed as part of that project, as you may recall. The People Friendly Streets Initiative, led by the Downtown Development Authority, they awarded a contract, they reviewed the proposals from a consulting firm. We expect the DDA board to vote on a designing contract in March of 2020. So this is, again, looking at kind of the next spate of projects. So we have William Street is complete, First and Ashley is going to be done this coming calendar year, and this is kind of the next round of those. So this will be an exciting project as well.
If I could, that design does include the detailed design for State and Northview. So you'll see the bike network expanded. You'll see some concepts, I think, on State for some sort of modified Festival Street, since that area's already been mostly taken over by pedestrians. So, design the streets so that it can serve different functions at different times of the day. And then the rest of the contract is for some visioning and preliminary costs and concepts for some other streets.
All right. Under other updates and information, there's going to be several things happening related to curbside management. So the DDA is going to spearhead a project, and we've also applied for a pilot project as well. We'll see if we get chosen for that. But the idea here is, looking at areas probably in downtown of how do you manage the curb in a much more dynamic way that reflects kind of the demands of the curb. So, Uber, Lyft pickup, Uber Eats, autonomous delivery robots, scooters, things are rapidly changing, and kind of this model that we have for on-street parking for hours at a time may not reflect the actual demand that's out there. So what are some of the strategies? And a lot of communities are really looking at this as a important strategy moving forward. We'll keep this commission up to speed on that. A Lower Town Mobility Study, the road safety audits were conducted in February 2020. Those are now complete and are being analyzed by the consultants. Office of Sustainability and Innovation update, you got a pretty detailed update from Missy this evening, so I don't need to go into that. Streetlight implementation, this is something we will report to you on a regular basis. I know it only says one streetlight was done, but we know several others were done. We just don't have the report from DT in terms of what days they were installed, so I didn't want to artificially, report a number that I don't have the documentation for yet. But this number you'll see go up by next month. And then traffic calming, Fernwood is currently underway. Glenwood, we're kicking off the process. I just was talking to the team today about, what the public engagement will look like in the strategy for that. And we continue to get requests. So I can't remember if at last meeting Fulmer was on the list, but Fulmer is on there now from Miller to Foss. And I think we've reported previously that Granger has also made the list at the bottom. So the queue is getting longer. We're trying to process them as expeditiously as possible. We are ahead of schedule. We set a target of processing 3 per year. If you look at what we did so far, we're I think on our 4th traffic calming petition this year. So that's good. We're keeping up with what our target is, but they are fairly labor intensive. So it's really just a question of how much capacity we have in order to how many we can process in a given year. And I believe, is that the last of it? Yes, that concludes the report.
Great. Let's see. So there's this budget amendment thing with Nixon. We have that listed as under the staff report and updates. Is that a separate conversation for today?
No, I didn't get any direction, I think, on that, so I think it's probably just what's included in the.
Okay. I read the thing, and it sounds like they want to move up the Nixon work by 4 years, and I'm wondering what that's about.
Okay, so I believe that as part of the budget approval, so we have these 2-year budget cycles, right? So we are entering the 2nd year of the budget. There was a request, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was from Councilmember Lum, that suggested what is the possibility of moving the Nixon project up in terms of timeline for implementation. And staff was going to, I believe, report by this next budget cycle what the ramifications would be to the rest of the budget, the capital improvement program, and others. So I think that's probably what this is referring to, is as part of the budget season that's kicking off right now, to have that report ready for council's consideration. Does that sound right?
I think the intent is to move the design up. And I think that's what the plan is to do some detailed design. I think that a couple of years ago, council passed a resolution directing us to move the project forward. So I think that's part of that. The challenge beyond the design is aligning the sources of funding, because there's some fairly significant underground utilities that have to be done as well. So I think what Mr. Yupi and Mr. Hutchinson are looking at is how to get all those funding sources aligned so the project can be looked at in a more near-term horizon. But as I remember the discussion with them, the amendment, the the goal is to start the design sooner.
Okay. If we can maybe get a check-in, was about that? Oh, wait.
I think the best thing to do is to have Mr. Hess give you a better update next meeting.
Okay.
Will do.
I think I
Great.
think there's some different conversations going on.
That's what I was wondering. Okay, thank you. So now we're up to liaison reports. Do we have any reports from any of our liaisons? Yes, Tim?
Yeah, the Commission on Disability Issues met earlier today, and we are going to discuss both the HB 4738 and the White Cane Law and come up with recommendations to hopefully vote on at our next meeting. And, yeah, that's the main thing I just wanted to.
Great. Would it be possible for you to bring the recommendations that Transportation Commission put together last month around what we would want in a statewide crosswalk law? It'd be great to get input from disability about.
I sent that to the group.
Okay. Other liaison reports? Okay, so moving on to commission member communications. So do any members of the commission want to say anything?
Just real quick, I'd like to say that I think that we are better off now than we were 4 years ago. And most inspiring is that I see a pathway forward that's been laid out for us to continue future work. And I thank those who made that happen and wish them the best.
Others? I just want to express our thanks to you, Howard. And Linda Diane also asked that I pass that along. She said she communicated with you directly, but thank you so much for all of the work that you've done for the city and for this commission. And yeah, we will miss you.
Thank you. I had the opportunity early on in my tenure here to work on transforming at that point the Taxi Cab Commission and the Transportation Commission, and work with former council member Werbachowski and council member Ackerman. Over the last couple of years, you've seen this commission really evolve very quickly to a model of what it looks like for commission members to work with city staff and provide some really meaningful recommendations and discussion to council and to the city administrator. I think the commission has risen to the equal standing of the Environmental Commission, the Energy Commission, and even the Planning Commission in terms of its impact. So when there are times where you wonder whether or not you're making a difference or not, as Bradley said, I think you certainly are, and you see the pace of things accelerating, and I appreciate the time you take away from other things that put purpose and meaning in your life to do this, and just know that the inputs are appreciated and respected, and they certainly have advanced the city's mobility goals.
Thank you so much. So are there any items that people would like to put forward for the next month's agenda? We have a few on the list already. So the resolution to endorse the White Cane crosswalk law language, hopefully by then we'll have feedback from the Disability Commission. We'll bring back the committee work discussion that we were not having today. I'm not sure what A20 plan is, if that's different from.
So that's what Missy was presenting on?
Right.
So what I suspect is because your next meeting will be towards the middle or end of March, that's going to be ramping up to right before it goes to council.
Okay.
So I don't know.
She'll
if
bring
it's
it back to us again.
To look at a draft.
Okay.
I don't know if they'll be presenting or not, but we'll definitely coordinate.
Great. It looks like there'll be a North Main Street update around MDOT.
Yeah, and that's tentative. I'm still waiting to get kind of the latest from them, but I think let's keep it on the work plan, and if I have news to share, if I have information to present, I'll happily do that.
Great. And I know we had an agenda item from Linda Diane. I'm blanking on what it was, but we have it documented, so we'll be bringing, whatever that is, we'll be bringing that in March as well. Yeah.
I have 3 potential agenda items. They don't have to happen next month, but at some point in the future. One is based on the presentation earlier today. I would love a presentation on interim treatments and guerrilla tactics that are currently being used. It seems that this is no longer a fringe treatment, but it's becoming much more regular I think it would be, standard best practice, really, to put in the paint and post. I think it would be beneficial for the community to know about those strategies, particularly since they're so low cost and they involve the community in such a way. That seems like a really exciting place to go. The second thing, these are both from some of the discussions that have been happening over the last few weeks, I suppose. One is I would like to see a presentation on the scope of the new Council Mobility Committee and how it relates to Transportation Commission. I'm not sure how that's going to work, and we haven't even seen anything about it or discussed anything about it, so I'm just wondering what the scope is there. Final thing to say is that watching council meeting last night, aside from everything that was being said, I'm going to keep this to Transportation Commission discussion, and that's it. There were some fairly disparaging comments made by council members about this commission in general and the volunteers and staff who serve on it. With that said, I would like someone to clarify the relationship between the role of council and the role of this Transportation Commission, including the role and responsibilities of the council member who is the representative on this body, as well as the possibility that we expand to 2 council members, or at least an alternative, so that the council member representative seat does not sit empty, particularly when we have a Vision Zero expert in the room. That's the nutshell on that.
Thank you, Brad. Yes?
And Madam Chair, I was reminded, one of the other actions that City Council took last night was to refer the Sam Schwartz supplemental work back to the Transportation Commission. Because that action happened last night, I wasn't able to put it on the agenda if I'm asking for action for you, so it has to kick to the March meeting. But that will be coming back to you. It's fairly similar to what you already saw back in November, but that was the decision of council to have you look at it again.
Great.
Yeah, that reminded me, I know you were saying something about the white cane law, but since we probably will be considering that in March, it probably won't be enough time, I don't think it'll be enough time. I mean, we might pass it a couple hours before this meeting, so that wouldn't really be
Okay.
enough time to,
So probably it'll be in April then?
yeah.
Okay. But if we could get the Council Mobility Committee on the agenda for March, I think that would be valuable.
Yeah.
Let's make sure that one's on for
That
March.
feels urgent.
It is urgent, I think.
As long as the mayor doesn't take certain actions.
Anything else? Okay. So the next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, March 18th at 7 PM in the second floor council chambers in City Hall. And if there are no objections, we will adjourn our February 19th meeting.
I'm sorry, I actually had my
Please.
hand
Oh,
raised. I
sorry,
had
I
just a
missed it.
quick question,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
so sorry. My question is in terms of the makeup of the Transportation Commission, so as there will be an interim city manager, will that person sit on the Transportation Commission?
That's a great question. Do we know the answer?
Or have you just been gracing us with your presence because?
No, the city administrator is a named ex officio member of the commission. It doesn't mean that the city administrator can't designate someone in his place, but, given that mobility are such compelling issues and impact everything from public safety through the carbon neutrality initiatives, I would strongly encourage both the interim and eventually the permanent city administrator to respect that role and spend one evening a month with the exceptional perspectives that are on this commission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that, okay. I'm going to pause extra long now in case I Okay, so if there are no objections, we will adjourn our February 19th meeting. Okay, seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.